All right, so I guess we'll give a few more minutes. Someone has probably said this already, but we'll give it a few more minutes for people to join before we get started. All right, in the meantime, I see people are dropping their names on the sheet. If you have not done that already, please feel free to pop into the sheet and just mention that you're here and you're hanging out with us. And here that is in the chat. Okay, let's get rolling. Oh, we're already recording. Cool, awesome. So, hello everyone. This is the July 16th edition of the SIG Release biweekly meeting or fortnightly meeting. This is a meeting that is recorded and available on the internet, so please be mindful of what you say. Please be sure to adhere to the Kubernetes code of conduct, and just in general be awesome to each other. Right. So we've got a few agenda items. And it seems like we're filling up more agenda items as we go. I would say anyone who is interested in dropping an agenda item, I think we're kind of going to open mic it today. So feel free to, if there's something you want to chat about, just pop that on the agenda. So we'll start off with Benjamin Elder, who wants to talk about kind, who is not here. Hold on. Hold on. Let me find Ben. All right, so in the meantime, I will move to the next item. I just pinged Ben. If he pops up, he pops up. So migrating the orphaned release jobs, right? So I've seen that we have quite a few jobs that are currently failing, and those jobs are all related to upgrade downgrade tests on GCE. What I have noticed is that those jobs are on our dashboard that are, but they are jobs that we don't officially own, and there's no one who gets notified on them when they fail, outside of us looking at our dashboard, right? So I've opened a PR to, so those jobs were GCE jobs for upgrade downgrade that were living in the SIG cluster lifecycle space within test grid configs. They are SIG cluster lifecycle said like, hey, that's not us. That's totally. So I have moved them over to the SIG GCP set of jobs and also created a new dashboard called SIG Release Orphaned, right? So that will give people an opportunity to still look at these jobs if they want to. I will send out, once I actually fix the broken thing in that PR, I will send out a notice to release team, GCP, and cluster lifecycle and testing regarding this change. So moving forward, we will start to move jobs that are consistently failing or flaky that people are not responding to orphaned, and give them an opportunity to bring those back into one of the things that we watch day to day. So informing or blocking or miscellaneous are one of the associated release number dashboards, so release 115, so on and so forth, right? If that does not happen, I would like to have some sort of hard date. So let's say if we move your thing in during the 116 cycle and it has not been attended to after by the end of the cycle, let's say, then it gets removed, right? We should not be owning or displaying jobs that we don't personally own or people are not being responsive to, right? We lose, I mean, seeing right on our dashboard kind of like, it makes me nuts. So let's stop doing that for 116. So that was that. Blockade, right? Okay. So during the prior to the 112.10 cut. Wait, hold on. Is Ben on first? Nope. Okay. So prior to the 112.10 cut, we merged in some changes to the release tooling, and these were small-ish changes, but they were a flood of small changes. So essentially, what we did was we added shell checking capabilities or scripts to do shell checks for the Kubernetes release tools, and it broke some stuff. Like there are weird glob patterns that happened and things that weren't actually getting exported and so on and so forth. Short version is changes to our release tools have the potential to break master blocking tests and a whole slew of assorted tests, because some of the tests depend on our tooling to actually cut a CI release, essentially, or stage a CI release, right? So these are then the releases that our CI jobs are expecting to be there, whether it's I'm looking for a tarball or something that is not there, and a bunch of jobs were bombing as a result, right? So being in a place where we can't release is bad from a security posture. So we decided to revert those changes, and we also cut I believe we also cut a tag for like a known good place in the repo. So I wrote up it's a really long issue that kind of analyzes some of the things that happened, and some of the to-dos as a result of that. So one of the things that we did was we added a blockade for the files that have a potential to impact any release thingies, right? Or our CI signal overall. So you can take a look at the link to that. We'll show you exactly where the blockade is and how it's configured. It's basically a regex pattern that points at like Anago, GCB manager, the stuff that's in build, the stuff that's in Debian and RPM, right? So essentially the new requirement, at least for the time being, is that only a release repo admin can remove the label for blocked paths and allow something to merge, right? So this is a temporary situation. This is just to make sure that we put the right bits in place to make sure that our repo is safe. So one of the things that we're doing is we're adding more testing around certain things, verifying that artifacts land where they're supposed to. So I will quickly just share my screen and show you that, so this is an example of a PR that's open right now. This PR touches what it's touching is release lib.sh, which is one of the release libraries that we use for Anago and GCP Manager. And you can see that it has a do not merge block paths, right? So anyone who is not familiar may not be familiar with the blockade plugin in Prow. The blockade plugin will essentially scan a regex pattern and spit out a message if you touched a file that is related to that regex, right? So quick message is changes to certain release tools will affect our ability to test, build, and release Kubernetes. This PR must be explicitly approved by SIG Release repo admin, right? Again, this is a temporary state. We want to make sure that we have the tests in place that we need to make sure it's safe to make changes. I think that what we proved over making all of those changes was that we cannot safely change things like Anago, right? And we need to get past that state. So this will be in place for about a month, and I believe we've also noted exactly when this blockade is going to expire. But in the meantime, anyone who is a repo admin, which are the SIG release chairs, will be the ones lifting holds or removing this label. I can go in and say like, okay, pulling that label, right, and allow this to merge. That will override the blockade, right? This is not like like the usual overrides. Well, not everyone uses overrides, but another feature of PROW is that you can initiate an override of some of the context that exist here, right? So if I wanted to override this test, I could. Again, this is something that is reserved for repo admins. So it's something that you should not be doing outside of like extreme circumstances, right? You know, it's a test that's consistently failing and it's a thing that's critical for X reason. Maybe you consider doing the override. But overall, stay away from overrides and stay away from blockades. We have this in place because this is critical tooling right now. And that was that. I think that we should, I think that anyone who's on the release team should, when I'll stop sharing my screen, anyone who's on the release team should take an opportunity to read through that issue. I'm not all the way done with my write-up, but it will give you some insight into what we have planned. So, you know, namely adding the blockades, making sure that things are properly tested, explicitly examine all of the things that failed when we broke those jobs and how we can make sure that doesn't happen again. One of the reasons that we also failed in those jobs is that every job that we use, a lot of the CI jobs that utilize Kubernetes release make the assumption, well, they use master, right? So the assumption is that master is always good. We should be using a known good tag of Kubernetes release instead. So one of the things to do is start tagging Kubernetes release, which I've started to do. I will do another tag soon, probably. A tag that is like post 1.12.10, 1.13.8, 1.14.4, which we released last week. So that's a known good state of the repo as well. And probably, or maybe we'll just do a tag for 1.15.1. So 1.15.1 is coming out on Thursday. If everything is successful during that release, we'll cut a tag to say that we know this repo is in a known good state here, right? Backfill each of the CI jobs to point to that known good tag. What that allows us to do then is we can now more safely make changes to the repo because we know that all of the jobs that could potentially fail are using a known good tag, right? And we can vet those changes that are happening on master, add tests as necessary, you know, breakpoints in certain scripts, so on and so forth, right? So active work, a little bit more of a write-up to do, but there have been a few things in the air where I haven't been able to finish that off. Question, comments, concerns?
Is there anything in this way that we should look at routinely doing for code freeze during the release cycle? Like maybe putting in a blockade for code freeze or anything?
Potentially, I think, so as I was looking at some of the stuff, the way I felt was anything that we're doing at, anything that we're doing for Kubernetes, we should probably be doing for Kubernetes release, right? If we say like, here's code freeze, like maybe we decide that like at code freeze, we cut a tag or something, right? And we cut a tag and we set up the same blocks that we do. I have a task on my list to mirror any of the plugins that we're using for Kubernetes first, so that we can instantiate like the same type of test info checks against it. But yes, I think you're right. When we freeze, we should freeze all the way, including the release tooling.
Yeah, I think Tim brings up a good question about whether what stuff in K-release should or could move inside the Kubernetes repository properly. One obvious example is the package definitions.
Yes.
But yeah, I think there's probably more scoping work to be done there on this.
Yeah, so Ben is mentioning push build as well. Push build is potentially one that we could do too. What I want before we start doing this stuff is like, we need to, I think we're starting to tease all of the information out of multiple people's heads about how all of these things work, the artifacts that we produce and stuff like that. Tim and I have, we sat down at some point. I mentioned this in the previous meeting, if you were there. We just did part of the 1.16 alpha.1 release where I mentioned some of this. That is recorded, and you can see that later. But you know, we kind of had a brainstorm And if you're curious about some of the things that we're talking about, because this, I mean, the same questions are getting asked, essentially, check out that brainstorm. So, you know, we need an understanding of the things that we host, how to host things, the artifacts that we're producing, the tooling that we're using currently. I think that that should happen before we make any moves. I know that, you know, there's some people who are saying like KK should be the canonical place where everything, you know, where everything is defined to do builds. And yes, that's probably eventually true, but we also have some spaghetti right now that I think we should manage first before moving anything out.
I will say though, if you move push build out, you unbreak almost all of the like things needing to check out release at head for no real reason. The main reason they're checking out Kubernetes release
is to get push build.
The push build. If
Yeah.
you remove that, I don't think they're depending on anything else, and we'll be a lot more free to actually develop there.
Okay, can you, would you mind opening an issue for that?
Sure.
Yeah. Like I haven't forgotten yet, but I might. And any release engineering people who are on the call, any of the release manager associates, that's a good potential first issue to pick up. So. All right, so part of that brainstorm that we've had, I think I have enough information now to essentially turn this into documentation. One of the first steps of that has already happened. Let me find it. Bart Smikla did quite a bit of work to analyze the artifacts that we're producing in the release process. And for some of the veterans on the call, like none of these are a surprise in particular, but this is kind of a good holistic overview of everything that we produce as a result of the release cycle. So this is talking about the Docker images, talking about the binaries that we produce, the debs and RPMs that we package, all of the little extra files that are involved in this, right? So configurations for like, so the tarballs, the configurations for like Windows and extra files for GCE. So all of that stuff, he did like I think he spent quite a bit of time on doing that. So we merged that earlier today. There may be some cleanup of it that I want to do, maybe just make sure that the file listings are minimized and things like that, maybe shift a few things around. But this is like one of the first steps of understanding like what we do, what we actually kick out the door. And now that we have that, in addition to some of the things that we've been brainstorming, what I would like to do is have a set of KEPs, right? Yay, KEPs, love KEPs. So one of them is an Omni KEP, essentially describing what releasing Kubernetes looks like, right? So just a big holistic overview of like what it means to release Kubernetes, right? And that will break out into the each of the areas that we care about. So like, all right, well, if we're going to release Kubernetes, we need to post certain things. What are those things, right? Having an artifacts list that we can reference is valuable because it says now we know we're kicking out Docker images, we have tarballs, we have configurations for GCE, we have configurations for Windows, we have debs and RPMs, and so on and so forth, right? So understanding all of the things that we need and or the things that we naturally output, and then figuring out where those things go. Okay, well we have it sounds like we have files and we have Docker images, right? So we need GCS GCS and GCR at a minimum, right? We also do builds on GCP, right? Google Cloud builds, right? So we need access to do something like that, right? So as of last week, worked with Tim Hawken and DIMS to get access to a staging project and a production project for the release team, for release engineering for SIG Release, to start prototyping what the shape of building an apt repo or building a yum repo, which are things that we'll need moving into CNCF infrastructure to actually do a release, right? So figuring out how to build a release end to end and working with the case infra group to get some of this done. So I think that a lot of us are, by us, I mean the SIG release chairs have the appropriate access to do some of this stuff. We should all be like writers or owners or editors or some sort of the requisite GCP projects. So work is happening there. I want to write all of that work down instead of yapping about it on a call. I think the first good step is having that omni-kep and then doing an update of the existing keps, because we have a few existing keps about releasing artifacts and different things right now, right? So making sure that all those threads tie together and anything that's changed since what we've written down in the past is kind of reconciled. And then from there, put everyone to work, right? Well, we have a ton of work to do. We've started to write it down on the release engineering project board as well as the SIG release project board. And we've also got issues that have been open since 2017, right? So like, you know, we've got stuff to do. So anyone who's on the call or anyone who's listening to this call afterwards, interested in getting involved in the release engineering stuff, please let us know. All right. Any questions, comments, concerns about that stuff?
Again, I've got plenty of both, but Ben is here, so I think we should move into Ben's point. You're muted, Ben.
Sorry, I was gonna say I did totally miss my slot. Sorry about that, and we still have Josh's topic as well. But I'm good to go. I didn't have a lot to say there. Basically, we've been running continuous testing against all the branches for a while now. We have a dashboard that I'm going to link to. There is one red one, but that's actually some ARM testing that we don't own that's being contributed. We're not sure what exactly is broken there, but all of the stuff that's running on RCI is super stable. And importantly, we have IPv6 testing that is pretty much the only IPv6 testing. I know one of the people who contribute that is trying to move that to beta, finally, having IPv6. So we'd like to get this into the release blocking dashboard. I believe it meets all of the suggested release blocking requirements, but we want to formally discuss this.
So finally, that dovetails with Josh's topic about implementing blocking criteria. And so I think a first good step is, outside of this discussion, to just open an issue. I would say open an issue, list the kind end-to-end for blah, right? And say that you want to move it into release blocking, and we can have part of the discussion there.
Which issue tracker?
Great question. SIG release.
Okay. And yeah, now would probably be a good time to talk about Josh's topic, unless anyone has any comments or concerns.
Awesome. By the way, awesome. It's nice, especially as we're moving, as we're moving like these upgrade downgrade tests from the GCE stuff off into this orphan board. It's nice to see something that can potentially be a replacement for some of them. So.
Yeah, that's the thing that's always been troubling about the lack of maintenance on the upgrade downgrade tests, is that we didn't have any coverage to replace them with.
I will still say that I mostly consider this additional signal. I do think we, want to consider at some point getting upgrades that work on some sort of
cloud provider
environment. We're also looking at options for that, and we're working to get this to run more tests. Most of it is just minor unnecessary incompatibilities in the E2E tests. But that's a little bit of a separate topic.
Okay, well, so I don't know how long ago, 6 months ago, 8 months ago, Aaron proposed criteria for what should be in blocking versus informing for the release test grid dashboards. And there's a set of criteria there. I'm not going to spell it all out, but it basically has to do with the test has to run so often, it has to actually pass when we expect it to pass, and it has to have a responsive maintainer. Those are the big things with some details. Pretty much, as far as I can tell, everyone agrees with this. We even had a whole discussion on whether or not those criteria were suitable around the recent SIG scalability test job failure issues. Although they're not really job failure issues. The jobs were failing because there was a problem with performance, which is what they should do. But there was an issue about whether those should be blocking or not, et cetera. And we decided that we would move the blocking and forming split back to where it was. So pretty much this has gone from a proposal to accepted policy, except that it's not exactly clear what we need to do to turn it into accepted policy. Aside from closing that issue there. I mean, presumably we need some additional, I know that we need some additional documentation in the CI signal handbook, which I've given myself a to-do to write. But I think that there needs to be documentation somewhere other than in addition to the CI signal handbook, because for one thing, wouldn't necessarily want to be directing everybody who contributes to Kubernetes to the CI signal handbook for a general understanding of test criteria. So where should that go?
Yeah, so my thought was that it should live in Kubernetes, community, contributors, devel, SIG release, blah, right? And we described that's kind of how it's broken up by SIG right now in develop, but that includes information on cherry picks and so on and so forth. So I think that is the right place to put it, and anything that we talk about that references job criteria should just link out to that instead.
Where is that?
Kubernetes community, contributors, devel, or it might be guide devel or devel guide.
No, devel. There we go. Okay.
And then SIG
yeah,
release.
and it is where we have cherry picks and builds and release cycle and release life cycle, etc. Okay. Okay, that makes sense. I'll add it there. So, aside from writing the documentation, is there anything that's left to do on that? Do we need to have a final vote on it?
I think that we can put it up for a vote once we have the documentation. That probably sounds right. I'm generally fine with most of the things that I read over there, but I will be honest that I did a quick skim of it. What I would say is that we definitely need, and this is something that SIG Scalability pointed out too, that we need a more well-defined definition of what what informing is, right? What the criteria for informing is, and how to promote between those boards.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll write some documentation, create some PRs, and if those PRs get accepted, it's voted in effectively. Okay.
Yep, and just for the record, I'm probably going to be fine with it. I approve any good change to this.
Yeah. So. Okay, that was it.
So I probably have a few things I could riff on, but I want to, since we have no more agenda topics, I want to open it up to open mic. Anyone new on the call? Anyone want to introduce themselves? Anyone have a topic for discussion that is not currently here? So I see, Paul, you raised your hand, so go for it.
I'm new. I'm on the release notes shadow, one of the shadows for the release notes. Yeah, so hi everyone. And this is my first release call. I'm in Australia, so time zone's always an issue. Yeah, but at least this one was at an acceptable time, which is cool. So hi everyone, looking forward to contributing.
Welcome, welcome. Thank you for stopping by. And I think we've got the rest of us are old timers. So, so anyone have topics that were not listed on the agenda that they want to chat about? And thank you, Tim, by the way, for taking notes. All right, so I think I've mentioned it in a few calls, and I will mention it here again, just to make sure we are consistently recording this. We made the decision last cycle, or in between last cycle and this cycle, to remove the branch manager role from the release team. Right. Part of the reason for that is that we want to more closely align the branch management duties to other release engineering-y type duties, right? So the change there is the branch manager is still the branch manager, but lives in this release managers group, which is under the release engineering subproject of SIG Release. I was trying to see how many times I could say release in one sentence. So and then the branch manager shadows have become release manager associates, right? So the idea here is that what we, I don't know all of the parameters of this just yet, but we want to build a team that essentially is kind of like a sister team to the product security committee, right? So at the top level of the patch release. Or of release managers, this release managers group is the patch release team, right? The patch release team is subject to the security embargo for Kubernetes, right? So notifications on CVEs and execution of, because they are the ones who execute on building a release for this, right? I think it makes sense, and I think Tim had mentioned this at some point too, it makes sense to align on the way we build a team. So there's an issue somewhere that I can track down, but it makes sense to align on the way we build our teams. And one of the things that I've noticed over the release cycles is that one, I want to see a level of consistency in the people who stop by to do patch management or to do branch management, right? Because we're essentially giving them the keys to our kingdom. Right, we're giving them the ability to release Kubernetes, and that comes with a lot of, that there's quite a bit of gravity involved in that, right? So there needs to be a level of trust and recognition of the names that we give those keys to, right? So what we did this cycle is so in the process of doing all of the shadow applications and reviewing those candidates and deciding who goes where, there were also a set of candidates. I'm sorry, there's like a creaking door in the back, and if that's getting caught on video, I'm sorry. So there are a set of candidates for the branch manager shadows. I believe for each role, just as like release team stats, we had about 80 people volunteer for the 116 release team. Like in terms of selection was very hard. We had like incredible candidates come through. Communications was fairly easy because we had about 3 or so people volunteer for communications. So we're like, cool, everyone, like you're all communication shadows now. But for every other role, at least 17 people applied to each of those roles. So I think with branch management, it might have been 22 to 28 people to kind of look at. And that's hard. Like, this is the short version. Like that was super hard. So what we did instead of selecting 3 to 4 people is we kind of went crazy and we said, let's take a bunch, right? Let's say we have a lot of release engineering debt to pay down. So let's take a bunch of people and see what we can do with this team. So we selected 13 people this time. And I think Josh's first thought was like, 13? It's like, that's a lot.
And then my first question was, how many mentors do you have?
So the idea here is that each of the people who have come before, who have gone through the release cycle, whether it be a branch manager or a patch release team member, guess what? Those are all mentors, right? So we have about 6 people there to mentor a set of 13 people. I am one of that set of 13 people. And kind of the purpose for that is to walk through the process with like fresh fresh branch management eyes and see and try to poke holes in some of the things that we're doing or some of the things that we've written down, and kind of understand the level of access that we need for each as we move through this contributor ladder, essentially, for release managers, right? So I've started to like figure out what access I do and don't have. If you're curious about the people who were selected for this release manager's associates role, I am dropping that into chat right now. Boop. So in selection, I kind of looked at like what I would like to see are people who have had either have release engineering chops by way of their job or by way of things that they've done in, say, test infra or in the release team, or people that I know I've seen before, right? And this is not to say this is a popularity contest, but this is something that's built on trust of the community, right? So if you're coming around, if you were coming around SIG Release, if you were part of the release team, you're more likely to get selected here, right? So I think that we've built the makings of a team, right? All told, between the between everyone who's involved in this release managers group, we've got the patch release team, the branch managers, the associates, the build admins. The build admins are the people who have the requisite permissions behind the Google curtain to push the button to generate debs and RPMs for Kubernetes, right? So they are part of the process, as well as the SIG release chairs, which essentially end up owning all of the mailing lists and all of the little doodads that involve doing the release. So it's important that they're included in that page, just for reference. So moving forward, I am going to be deduping some of the information that is on the branch management handbook, as well as the patch release team handbook, and I'm deduping it by running through it myself, right? So immediately before this call, we did a call for cutting the 116 alpha 1, right? So we staged it on that call. Probably later, I will do the release portion of it, and that is recorded. That will be up later on the playlist. So I talk about, there's lots of overlap here. I talk about some of the release engineering problems that we have, and some of the things that we can immediately fix in the docs. And so yeah, the idea is just to exercise the tooling, exercise the docs, throw a bunch of people at this problem, and kind of enable us to pay down this technical debt that we've been building since essentially the project started. So I'll stop yapping and ask if anyone has questions about any of that.
Yeah, we need to figure out the apprenticeship program in terms of things like timelines. One of the reasons why the release team shadow program has been successful is because there is a definite sort of time bound to it. And well, for release manager assistance, yeah. So I remember it abbreviated to RMAs. So for release manager, right? For release manager assistance, the time bounds are not necessarily going to be a release cycle, but there should be some kind of time bound, both for the sake of the apprentice and the sake of the mentor.
Yeah, so I think I think it's appropriate as you move through this ladder that doesn't exist yet. I think that it makes sense for the associates and the branch managers to still align around the release cycle, because they'll be doing things that are related to the release cycle, right? So whether it's cutting branches, managing CI for that, a lot of the stuff that has moved out of the test infra playbook has moved into the branch management playbook, right? So there are branch management tasks, there are test infra tasks, there are some CI signal associated tasks that are part of the branch manager role, and thereby something that associates should be learning. So I think that it still makes sense for like associates and branch managers to attend the release meetings when when possible. They are also on the release team mailing list, so that they get all of those communications and all of the right events. And so yeah, so I think again, it makes sense to align them around the release cycle, but they can feel free to have different deadlines for their specific role things, right? The patch release team will be a little different because again, they're not time bound by a cycle. part of the reason for doing this is also to get out of the notion that like this role needs to be time bound to a cycle, right? Because but also to kind of build a continuity around this so that someone who has been who has been a branch manager, like what's the next step for them, right? The next step for them should be a patch release team if they want it. So making sure that they're prepped for that, are encouraged to be promoted up into that, right? And not to say that we haven't had it before. It's been kind of suggested and people have done it, but it would be nicer to actually have a contributor ladder around that, because that's the obvious next step. So,
well, for that matter, it's starting to get time for the release team. We need to look at where people can advance to now that we've had multiple generations of release teams, because not everybody's going to advance to release lead.
Yeah. So this is something I had mentioned, and on I think the first release team call, did something new, kind of like we just went around the room and I asked each of the role leads, like, what are your goals? Like if there's a thing that you could name, like your one thing for the cycle, like what's that? Well, what do you want to get done, right? So I think that part of it is I want to see, so in my head at least, right? There are two primary paths, right? One, you come in, you do your term as a shadow, as a role shadow. You did an awesome job, so you're selected for lead for that role, and you crush it as lead for the role, and then there's kind of a crossroads, right? And from there, you choose like, okay, well, I think I want to lead this thing, right? You go to a release team lead shadow, right? And then the next cycle, hopefully, you become the release team lead, right? So 4 cycles, you're here for a year. We got you for a year. So like that's one path, right? The second one I think is more unspoken, and because like that, that's kind of obvious. We've written that down in our documentation around release team selection. The second one is a little less obvious, and it's, I have gotten to that crossroads where I have been a lead, or maybe I've just shadowed a few roles for a while, right? And I've identified some big problem, a process problem or something like that, and I'm going to go fix it, right? I'm going to go fix it, but for me to take the time that I need to go fix it, I can't do it on the release team, right? And that's kind of like what I did for features, right? So features got rebranded to enhancements. We wrote the first handbooks, right, starting that cycle. And then I said, we have a bigger problem. And the problem is like how we pull things into the cycle in the first place, right? So started focusing on the PM stuff. I would like to see more people say, okay, right, there's a huge test info problem that we want, like not like for the call, like I'm not saying there's a test info problem, right? But as an example, like there's this thing that I want to fix. Like we want to write a release notes. We want to write a release notes website, because the way people are consuming release notes now are not great, right? So that is a tangible improvement that people were able to get done during the release cycle, but it's something that expands beyond any one release cycle, and it's something that they now have to, they are on the hook to maintain. Right, Jeff? So, I want to see things like that. Or, we're making improvements. Right now, Bob is making improvements to the way that we handle the enhancement tracking, right? Working to build automation between GitHub and the enhancement tracking spreadsheet that we use today, right? So, like, thinking about a problem the way it affects everyone in the project, as opposed to just the release team, or just for that release cycle, and figuring out how to drive it down, right? Like that's the other path, and it's more of a fuzzy path, right? Like happy to talk to people about like how to get that done, but it's something that more people need to consider, and it's definitely. I'm also seeing a pattern of maybe lifers is the wrong word, but people who will rotate back into the release team. Not saying that that's a bad thing, right? But having the opportunity to work outside of the release team and get these things done, it's entirely possible. And you, in fact, have more time because you are not bound to attending the release team meetings or the burn down meetings, stuff like that, right? You have time to think about these problems, write proposals for them, and actually action on them. So I think, that path is definitely like lesser walked, not saying it's not walked at all, but it's someplace that I would like to see more people get to.
Yeah, but Stephen, how am I going to get my Kubernetes cat shirts?
You're right. Actually, forget everything I said. I still need to get one of those Kubernetes shirts.
Well, we just need to have, general release team shirts.
Oh yeah, no, I'm mostly kidding, but I have had people ask me about this and been like, "Oh, well, you should join a release team."
Yeah.
And I mean, the guarantee is not that you will always get a shirt. Sometimes you get a mug. You get a mug made by Josh Burkus, right?
Sometimes you get a what did I get? I got a business card holder actually from Aish.
There you go, right? So
Right.
they're not always shirts.
Right, but I mean, obviously, this is why people are, joining the release team.
Because it totally makes sense to put in whatever it is.
A quarter
right,
of work.
80 hours of work over 11 weeks in order to get a T-shirt.
Yeah, I always
It's like, just send me the design. I'll make it myself.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, I think that it's all jokes aside. I still see the release team as like one of the single best ways of like trial by fire for the project, right? Being able to come in and like you were forced to interact on so many different levels with different SIGs and the kind of work that you do, like it's super valuable, right? So I love being around the release team. I love seeing the work that they do every cycle. It's a special place in my heart, which is why I try to like do HR for it or like be in some way involved, because I think that it's a great contributor experience, the opportunity for experience. But yes, there are more places to contribute, right? And I think that we have the release team. A lot of the roles in the release team, they map somewhat to different SIGs, right? So if we find that your interest lies in a different SIG, whether it's like CI Signal has strong ties to testing, and and Test Infra did too, and enhancements in communications have ties to PM, and so on and so forth, right? So like if we find that your interest lies outside of the release team, that's okay, right? Or you have gained the reputation where you're able to do the thing like schedule a Kubernetes webinar, or are published to the blog, or have like rights to publish to the blog, or have reviewer or approver rights in some test infra folder, right? We want to enable you to do that, but we want to make sure that we're looking at the path for you, and like the path is not necessarily staying in the release team. So again, it's kind of a fuzzier thing and I think it will take mentorship of the people who are on the release team, or even deeper mentorship than we're doing right now. I think that Josh has made a great start doing this emeritus advisor role for the last few cycles. So are we on cycle 3 now, Josh? Yeah, something like that.
No, 2.
2. Okay.
This is the second cycle that we're doing it.
Oh wow. I thought it was 3. Okay. All right.
Nope. No, things move fast in release cycle time.
Yeah.
It's like, we've been doing that forever. Well, actually, we've only been doing it since 1.15.
Yeah. Like, I'm just. It's like aging in Kubernetes years, or like startup years that are like 10 times longer.
Yeah, and that is something. It's one of the things actually that I promise you will happen with the release team, which is somebody will stick to doing something completely pointless because it was inserted into the release cycle and instructions in like 1.12, and they're working on 1.18. And at this point, it's been handed down from on high.
Yeah, like we don't even have that thing anymore. Like, why are you still doing
this? Right? Yes, because it's in the handbook.
Yeah. So, and this is one of the reasons that anytime I mention the handbooks and and shadows are on the call, I say question the handbook. question every time you look at a handbook, if it's something that doesn't make sense, like realize that it may have been written a few cycles ago, maybe entirely stale. And this is not law. I think every release cycle we tweak the release team selection process just a little bit, right? We figure out how we do that differently. We rewrite the handbooks. Like, so anything that you see there, feel free to question. Like that's, maybe we're not looking at the right at a certain perspective, and that allows us to improve what we've written down. So like, do that. Feel free to do that. Feel empowered to do that. In terms of more like graduation, into different roles. One of the things that we've been doing or started to do, I think it's one cycle now or something, or the release team leads graduate into as sub-project owners for the release team sub-project, right? So we initially seeded the sub-project owners with the release team leads from N-3, maybe, cycles. So I think Josh, Aish, Aaron, and oh my God, I'm missing one. And then Claire was 114. Yes, wait, no. Oh my God, 115. Too many release cycles. But every time that a release cycle is done, we'll go in and we'll sweep the owners and make sure that the people who have been doing that work are allowed to have approval rights on the things that affect the way we do releases. So that's one path to sub-project ownership, right? And not everyone's going to go down that path, but if you're interested in being a sub-project owner, you care about release engineering, or you care about the licensing project that we're kicking up, and like, let us know so we can figure out how to put you in those places, right? So all that said, we've got 6 minutes left. I make sure that if anyone's got stuff to chat about before we go. If not, we can have 6 minutes back. All right. Well, thank you everyone for showing up. I will see you in 2 weeks, if not sooner. Later.